The doorbell's chime cut through the quiet like a single, clear note of warning. I froze, a dish towel still damp in my hand. My 6-year-old son, Ethan, looked up from his coloring book, eyes wide and unblinking. The second chime rang, lower somehow, and he scrambled off the couch. Before I could move, his small fingers wrapped tight around my arm. "Mommy," he whispered, barely breathing, "it's Daddy." I felt the tremor in his grip, the way children instinctively sense the things adults try to hide. The hall smelled faintly of lavender from the diffuser. I kept running, a futile attempt to soften the edges of our lives. Through the frosted glass panel of the front door, a tall silhouette shifted, familiar even in blur. The late afternoon sun threw long golden stripes across the hardwood, turning the brass knob into a dull gleam. Ethan's hand tightened. His knuckles were white, the same pale shade as the silk sleeve of my blouse. It had been 3 weeks since Ryan left on his business trip. 3 weeks of carefully stacked routines, morning oatmeal, school drop-offs, quiet nights with my laptop glowing long after Ethan slept. 3 weeks of peace. And now, that peace stood on the other side of the door, ringing the bell again. My heart thudded once, hard, like the first drop of a summer storm. I swallowed, smoothed the towel across the counter, and met Ethan's frightened eyes. I wasn't always this careful, this deliberate with every breath I took. 3 years ago, back when Ethan was still a toddler and the house still smelled of fresh paint and promises, I believed Ryan when he said this is just a rough patch. We'd sit across from each other at the granite kitchen island, Ethan's high chair between us, and Ryan would spin late nights at the office into a noble sacrifice. He'd brush a hand through his dark hair, look me in the eye, and say, "It's for us, Lauren. For a better life." But the better life he spoke of came with long absences and an anger that rolled in like summer thunder. I remember one night vividly, Ethan barely 2, feverish, crying. I called Ryan again and again. Midnight passed before his car finally crunched the driveway. He came inside smelling of cologne that wasn't his. "You think I don't work hard enough for this family?" he snapped before I could even speak. His voice was low, dangerous. Ethan whimpered in my arms. My throat tightened, but I held his gaze. "I think," I said, each word trembling, "you've stopped being here at all." He looked at me like I'd betrayed him, like I was the one sneaking out at night. The silence that followed was worse than shouting. It became the soundtrack of our marriage. The next morning, my mother stopped by. She didn't ask questions, she never did, but she pressed a tiny silver locket into my palm. "Your grandmother wore this," she said softly. "When you feel like you can't breathe, remember, this carries generations of women who did hard things and kept their heads high." The locket was warm from her skin, a small, weighty truth. I slipped it over my neck, the chain cool against my collarbone. That night, after Ethan finally slept, I stood at the kitchen window and watched the dark outline of Ryan's car pull away again. I remember thinking, I can't let Ethan grow up believing this is love. That was the moment, quiet, almost unremarkable, when the decision settled inside me like a stone dropped in water. I would build something stronger than this marriage. Something Ethan and I could stand on, even if Ryan never came back. After that night, I learned how to move like a shadow, quiet but unstoppable. When Ryan's trips grew longer, I used the evenings like borrowed time. Once Ethan was asleep, I brewed a pot of coffee strong enough to outlast my doubts and opened my laptop at the kitchen table. The house would be still except for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of settling wood. I began with what I knew, event planning. Back in college, before I became Ryan's wife, I'd coordinated campus fundraisers and loved every frantic, glittering minute. So I built a simple website, Lauren Mitchell Events, using a free template and stock photos. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. My first client was a friend of a friend, a small engagement party for 20 people. I stayed up past midnight designing mood boards and calculating budgets, my hands shaking as I hit send on the proposal. When the client replied yes, with 3 exclamation marks, I whispered the word aloud, yes, and felt something inside me reawaken. Every dollar I earned went straight into a hidden account, a quiet lifeline. I told Ryan I was volunteering with the PDA, which wasn't entirely a lie. I just left out the catered luncheons and five-figure invoices. The work wasn't easy. There were nights when the babysitter canceled, and I juggled floral arrangements with a fussy toddler on my hip. I endured clients who thought working mom meant discounted rates. But each small win, each glowing review, was a thread in the safety net I was weaving for Ethan and me. Then came the night I met Grace Porter, the veteran event producer who changed everything. I'd been hired to assist at a charity gala downtown, a last-minute gig that felt out of my league. Grace, silver-haired and sharp-eyed, watched me juggle a last-minute seating disaster with a calm smile. Afterward, she handed me her card. "You have the instincts," she said. "Call me if you want to grow this thing."
Grow it I did.
Grace became a mentor and a mirror, proof that a woman could build an empire without sacrificing her soul. Under her guidance, I learned vendor negotiations, luxury branding, even the art of walking into a room full of men in tailored suits and making them listen. By the time Ethan turned 5, Lauren Mitchell Events had outgrown my kitchen table. I rented a small studio space, sunlit brick walls, wide windows, under the guise of a part-time consultancy. Ryan never asked. Maybe he didn't want to know. I posted only modest updates on social media. Pictures of Ethan at the park, the occasional latte art. No hints of the contracts I was signing or the six-figure revenue quietly stacking in my account. Sometimes, late at night, I would hold the silver locket between my fingers and whisper a quiet thanks to my grandmother, to the women before me, to the woman I was becoming. Each heartbeat felt like a step further from the girl who once begged for Ryan's attention. I was building more than a business. I was building freedom. The door creaked open, and the faint scent of rain-damp pavement followed Ryan into the hallway. Ethan's grip tightened on my arm until I could feel the tiny crescents of his fingernails through my sleeve. "Lauren," Ryan said, voice low, carrying that familiar practiced warmth. "Hey, buddy." He bent a little toward Ethan, but my son pressed closer to me instead. Ryan's smile faltered. I stepped back, allowing him in, but not too far. The house looked different now because I was different. I had spent the morning tidying, not out of duty, but out of pride. Soft jazz from the Bluetooth speaker mingled with the faint lavender that drifted from the diffuser. On the wall above the console table, the framed certificate from the National Event Designers Guild caught the light. Entrepreneur of the Year. Ryan's gaze landed on it almost immediately. "What's this?" He took a step closer, brow furrowed. "A recognition," I said evenly, sliding Ethan gently behind me. "For my company." "Your company?" His voice hitched slightly, like he hadn't expected me to own something that wasn't his. I nodded toward the photographs arranged along the staircase. Me and Grace at the New York Gala, Ethan in his miniature bow tie at a client's Christmas soiree. All subtle, but undeniable proof. "I started it while you were away," I said. "Lauren Mitchell Events. We just booked our first seven-figure contract." His eyes narrowed, confusion giving way to a flicker of something else. Pride? Disbelief? Maybe fear. "You never told me," he said, almost accusing. I met his gaze, steady. "You never asked." He looked away first. The silence stretched, heavy with the years of unspoken things. Behind him, the late afternoon light spilled through the window, catching the silver locket at my throat. I rested a hand on it instinctively. "I thought," Ryan began, but the words died in his throat. He tried again. "I thought you needed me." "I needed a partner," I replied, my voice soft but firm. "Not someone who disappears. So I learned to stand on my own." Ethan peeked around my hip, his wide eyes fixed on his father. I felt the steady thrum of his heartbeat against my side. Fast, like mine, but strong. Ryan's shoulders sagged. He glanced again at the certificate, at the photographs, at the life that had bloomed in the quiet spaces of his absence. "You built all this without me?" "Yes." I let the single word settle between us, a simple truth that needed no decoration. The old Lauren might have filled the silence, might have softened the edges with a nervous laugh or a conciliatory gesture. But the woman standing here now held the moment like a carefully set stage. "I came home," Ryan said finally, voice low, "because I wanted to make things right." I studied him, the way his jaw tightened, the uncertainty in his eyes. For the first time in years, I felt no urge to shrink or to soothe. "I'm glad you want that," I said, each syllable measured. "But this," I gestured lightly to the room, to Ethan, to myself, "is who we are now. Strong. Whole. Whether or not you stay." Ethan pressed closer, his small hand finding mine. Ryan looked at our joined hands, as if seeing something he couldn't quite name. The man who once believed the world bent for him stood silent, surrounded by proof that it no longer did. Ryan followed me into the living room, his footsteps slow, almost hesitant. Ethan stayed pressed to my side until we both sat on the sofa. I rested a hand on his small back and felt his heartbeat, still quick, but steadier now. Ryan lowered himself into the armchair across from us. For a moment, he only studied the room as if taking inventory. The polished oak shelves lined with design books, the framed contracts from high-profile clients, the tiny potted succulents Ethan had planted in mason jars. Every detail whispered the same truth. This life had been built without him. "I didn't realize," he said finally. His voice was quiet, stripped of the arrogance that used to fill every silence. "I knew you were capable, but this is something else." "It had to be," I replied. "Ethan deserves stability. I needed to create it myself." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I want to be part of his life. I want to be part of yours. I know I've been gone too much, but I can change." I took a slow breath. Change isn't a promise. It's action. Ryan nodded, swallowing hard. "Tell me what you need from me." I felt the silver locket beneath my fingertips. My grandmother's quiet strength seemed to hum through the chain. "First," I said, meeting his gaze, "Ethan's safety and peace come before everything. That means therapy, family counseling, for all of us. If you want to be here, you show up every week. No excuses." He nodded quickly. "Yes." "Second," I continued, "our finances stay separate. I've worked too hard to risk losing independence again. I'll co-parent with you, but I won't give up what I've built." A flash of surprise crossed his face, but he didn't argue. "Understood." "Third," I added, voice steady, "you'll earn Ethan's trust back slowly. That means calls when you travel, no sudden disappearances. He needs consistency more than anything." Ryan's shoulders sagged as though a weight had settled there, but he met my eyes and said, "I can do that." Ethan shifted against me, his small hand slipping into mine. He looked up at his father, then back at me. For the first time that evening, I saw a flicker of curiosity instead of fear in his eyes. "These are the terms," I said softly. "Not punishments. Boundaries. If you want to be in our lives, you respect them." Ryan sat back, the tension in his face easing into something I hadn't seen in years. Humility. "I understand," he said, voice low. "I'll prove it." The room fell silent except for the gentle ticking of the wall clock. I felt Ethan relax against me, his breathing slow and even. The air no longer vibrated with old arguments. It felt new, waiting. I touched the locket again, the cool silver steady beneath my fingers. For the first time in a long time, the conditions were mine to set, and the power to keep them was entirely my own. The next few weeks unfolded like the first days of spring, quiet, hesitant, but full of small, unmistakable changes. Ryan showed up for counseling every Tuesday evening without fail. At first, he sat stiffly in the circle of chairs, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the carpet. But session by session, his posture eased. He began to listen instead of defend. When he finally said to Ethan, "I'm sorry I wasn't here when you needed me," my son's small shoulders softened as though some invisible weight had been lifted. At home, our rhythms settled into something steady. Ethan and I still had our nighttime routine, hot cocoa, and one more chapter of Charlotte's Web. But now, when Ryan tucked Ethan in on his nights, the boy no longer clung to my arm. Their laughter floated down the hallway like the distant chime of wind bells. I kept my own life in full bloom. My company signed a major corporate retreat that would take us to Napa Valley. Grace sent me a note in her tidy cursive. Proud doesn't begin to cover it. I pinned it above my desk as a quiet badge of honor. One evening, after a particularly long day, I stood at the kitchen sink, the silver locket cool against my skin. I turned it over in my fingers, tracing the delicate etching my grandmother's hands had once held. Her words echoed back to me. This carries generations of women who did hard things and kept their heads high. I understood them now, not as a burden, but as a birthright. Ryan stepped into the doorway, watching me in the warm light. You've built something beautiful here, he said. There was no envy in his voice this time, only respect. I met his gaze. We built something, I corrected gently, but I built myself. For a heartbeat, we simply stood there, two people reshaped by choices, by effort, by quiet resilience. The past hadn't disappeared, but it no longer defined us. Later, after the house grew still and Ethan slept peacefully, I whispered a silent promise to the women before me and the boy who would one day be a man. That he would grow up knowing that strength is not the absence of fear, but the choice to rise in spite of it. I closed my fingers around the locket, feeling its steady weight. I am whole, I said into the hush, a final, unshakable truth.